Hello, YouTube world. I'm back again, and as promised, we'll discuss the later incarnations of the Star Trek role-playing game. The next one that pretty much came out was Last Unicorn's version. Again, it had overlays. Rather than going through the detailed picking skills out and having specific skills that get improved by static amounts, you had basically various overlays that you would add to your character. For instance, if your character attended the Vulcan Science Academy before entering Star Trek, that had a flat amount of skills or system of flat number of skills that would be added to the character sheet. And of course, the thing is that each overlay took so much time, so many years, and so on. So it was a little more broken when it came to the Vulcans because they're so long-lived. I did this once. I had a character that had not only gone through Starfleet Academy and the Science Academy and the Vulcan Science Academy, but it also had the Culinary discipline and had a few extra psionic backgrounds, so that he was more than just simply a touch telepath. He could actually create illusions and so on and so forth using mind-to-mind communication. So that gets a little broken. They really should have simply had in the rules that you had at most so many overlays for the character at creation. However, it did. The Way of Kolinar, which was the Vulcan splat book, added so much depth to a race you already feel you know pretty well. For instance, it would never cross anyone's mind to create a psionic discipline that would effectively lie, i.e. the illusionary discipline. You're creating a reality that doesn't exist, that would seem to be inherently counter to the whole Serakian logic, dedication to truth and facts and so on. And you're just be too alien to a Vulcan mind. However, they were influenced by something that was existing with the prior FASA system, in that there was a Vulcan colony called Nakas 3 where they had rejected Serakian teachings. They still emphasized logic, but they didn't suppress their emotions. Such a culture I could see developing something like, I forget exactly what it was called, but the Way of the Illusion. And on Vulcan, they basically were practitioners of entertainment. Obviously not to make people laugh or cry, but they would use their illusions to bring to life, for instance, histories. So still being a logical Serakian Vulcan, not trying to be emotional or elicit emotional responses, but simply somebody wanted to know about Surak, for instance. And so you create an illusion of Surak and interacting and discussing his philosophies with modern Vulcans. So it was a very playable system, I found. Very easy to advance the character. The only real issue that I had, we homebrew, we're all of my Star Trek group here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, are Grognards, and yeah, we'll add rules or ignore rules as it suits us for the game. I mean, we're consistent, but we will change what's published to fit our play style. And we don't like having limitations. We don't like being told, oh, well, you can only have an attribute go up to so much. You can only have a skill go up to so much. And so the limitations were pretty much on skills 10. I've got a character with a computer operation at 15 because he's like the Federation's best hacker. You know? So those were easy to just simply get around, but as written, yes, there are some. If You play a character long enough, eventually is the perfect character because all of his skills are at 10. His attributes are maximum for his race, and there's no room for growing anymore. Now, the transition from Last Unicorn to Decipher was very interesting. WotC buys Last Unicorn. And some of the people from WotC went over to Decipher. Some of the people from Last Unicorn went over to Decipher. And they created the new iteration of Star Trek. And basically, if you've played Decipher's the Middle Earth role-playing game, it's the same system. It's modeled off of the D20 approach in that you have the difficulty classes and so on, but you're resolving your checks with 2 6-sided dice. Which, by the way, in Last Unicorn, if you had a 6, you rolled it again. It exploded. There was 1 die that you declared could possibly explode. In this one, it's more, if you roll boxcars, then if I recall, it's been a while since I played the Middle Earth game. But if you roll boxcars, I believe you get to get an explosion going. But I say that under correction because it's been a long time. And I never personally DM'd it. I only played in it. But like the Middle Earth game, you get advancements. You bank up the points, you accumulate through play, the experience points, and then when you get a certain amount, you can then say, I'm buying an advancement. You can be enhancing the current class that you have, because once again, we go back to classes, or you can add on a new class. So people who play Lords, I keep wanting to say Lords of Middle Earth. It's a Middle Earth role-playing game. Or have played the D20 3-point plus D&D. It's, aside from the fact that it's a 2D6 based rather than a D20 based, it's very, very similar. Now, I never really got into the Decipher version of Star Trek. I never really played it. My familiarity comes from playing the Middle Earth game. My DM for that, was looking at running Star Trek because he also DMs me in Star Trek. And he wasn't overly thrilled with it either. If he did run it, it was while I was living in California, and he and another couple of friends were available to play, and so he was going to run Star Trek if he did. Then I obviously wasn't around. It's a little hard to commute over 2,000 miles, and this is before Discord and other online gaming platforms really had gelled to being usable. So, I would come back for Christmas at visits, and we would get together and game like mindless savages, catching me up over what's gone on in the various campaigns over the previous 11 months or so. And but we never once did the Decipher Star Trek game on those visits, so I don't think he ran it much. Now, the current rights holder for a Star Trek role-playing game is a British company called Modiphius. I think they're based in London. I don't know that much about the published game, which is Star Trek Adventures. What I do know about it, my group in California play tested the game. And I play tested Pathfinder as well. And believe me, you can be in the play test before publication, and when it gets published, you're going to be looking at it going, this is similar to the game I play tested, but most of the rules that we were using aren't here. And there's a whole bunch of rules I never saw. So how it plays now, I can't say, but one of the things that I liked about their mechanic is that they did make the distinction between something that would be kind of round based versus a long term project. For instance, repairing the warp benches. You're not going to do that in a few seconds or even a couple of minutes. It's going to take you, especially if the damage is severe, it's going to take you a very long while to get that damage fixed, or at least to the point where the ship's performance is improving. They also had long time scale opportunities for instance, doing some research. You found a new life form. There's something weird about it, and so you're in the biology lab working on this strange plant, figuring out what's wrong with it or what's different about it or whatever. So it seems like a good game. I have not really focused on it because I discovered Hackmaster, fell in love with that game, and decided, you know what, I could very easily retrofit FASA to the Hackmaster engine. And so that's where most of my attention has been. I never did this myself, but there's ICE, Iron Crown Enterprises, that puts out Rollmaster, also came up with a Space Master game. They have their own little campaign setting with the Fifth Terran Empire or something like that, set in the far future. But there's obvious overtones of Star Wars with some of it. You even have what's called a power sword, which is basically a beam of plasma, a contained plasma, that does amazing damage. And a certain set of mystics are known to be able, when using a power sword, to use adrenal defense to not just increase their own defensive bonus against an attack, but use it to block and possibly even reflect energy weapon beams. If that doesn't say Jedi to anybody, you've been asleep. But because of that, you could very easily set up all kinds of science fiction games. There's a race, something like 6 replicants. Hello, Blade Runner game. You could very easily do a Star Trek role-playing game. There are even human enhancements, so you could have an adventure where they come across survivors of the eugenics wars. So there's a number of things that you could do with Space Master and simulate Star Trek. I've also run that as Star Wars. I have not done the Star Trek variant yet. I may at some point, once I play test my current Star Trek approach with Hackmaster. It's the second by second count up in combat that gets me, because it's perfect for a massive action where you're having starship combat going on. Shields get breached, and so boarding parties can activate. You've got the second by second with the starship combat in terms of getting shields back online, charging weapons, maneuvering, and so on and so forth. The number of seconds it takes for a transporter to cycle, and then, of course, once the boarding parties are there, they're theoretically going to be resisted, so you've got the personal combat going on. It is a bear to run. I will admit that. If it's just starship combat or just hand-to-hand or close combat, it's easy peasy. But once you've got the ships and their cycle time going, I either need to have players that are really well versed in the mechanics involved in the second by second, so they're able to track things on their own, or I need an assistant DM to handle one aspect of the combat while I handle the other. We just have to make sure we're both ready at the same time to announce the next count up, which I've DM'd far more complicated situations with multiple DMs, massive battle royales for Living Arcanus at conventions. So this would be a lot easier coordination between people because of, once again, the count up regulates what's going on at both tables or every table. If it's really complicated. I will admit, when it comes, I have a special place in my heart for Star Trek when it comes to science fiction. That was my first love. I am old enough that I do remember watching the original series in its first run. Most of it's sense images because I was 1 when it first premiered on television, and I was 3 when it was taken off the air. But, I remember, for instance, worrying the Enterprise during the opening credits would whoosh right off the screen and run us all over. Very young mind. But then I was also in 71 living in an area where I think the first syndications started up, and fell in love with it at that point. So, people say Star Trek or Star Wars. I'm both. But if you're going to talk about where my deepest love comes from, that's going to be Star Trek. Sorry, Star Wars. Trek had me 6 years before you were on the scene. But so I always enjoy playing Star Trek. I mean, even before FASA came out with the game in 1980, we were coming up with, okay, so what would a phaser do in the way of damage in D&D? So, we use D&D for everything for the most part. And it's odd that we never really gravitated towards Traveler to adapt for a Star Trek game, but we did D&D. So the various systems have their own fun. Because I'm also, as a player, a bit of a storyteller, I don't really go into heavy backstory with most of my characters because, let's be perfectly honest, folks, and I don't mean no offense to those who really enjoy coming up with like a 3 or 4 page backstory for their character. Unless you're working with a DM that wants these backstory elements as plot hooks or adventure twists or somehow to tie into the campaign world, it's never going to come up aside from in role-playing conversation. It's never going to be adventure relevant unless it's a little bit easier to make it relevant in Star Trek. You've in FASA, you've got a character that what part of Starfleet he had served in before his current assignment. And if you really want the detail, you roll Galaxy Exploration Command. Well, what are some of the Explorer vessels? It could be a Reliant class. It could be a smaller cruiser, or even maybe a frigate. If it's Military Operations Command, it's pretty much going to be a frigate or destroyer. If you're playing DS9 era, the Defiant would be military ops because it's an actual warship. And then you had Galaxy Operations Constitution class. So based on those parameters, if you have like the Franz Joseph Starfleet Technical Manual, and FASA published a whole Federation Ship Recognition Manual where you could see the various ship registries and names, and you could assign for yourself, okay, well, I served on the USS Saladin as a destroyer, or I served on the Farragut. And then at that point, it's really easy for that to come in. It's like, well, the Farragut was involved in that encounter, Lieutenant. You just came here from the Farragut. What happened exactly? And then, your background becomes a little bit more easily relevant in the middle of an adventure. So that's the rundown on the various iterations of Star Trek and possible adaptations a gamer could make to play a Star Trek game. As for my next video, I'm still kind of contemplating possible topics, or I may have something else hit me. But once again, if you have a particular burning question you would like to ask, or a topic that you would like to hear me talk about, go ahead and drop a comment and let me know. And I either make the next video based on your comment, or I'll put it in the queue if I get a whole bunch of comments. I'm fair that way. So until next time we talk, may all your hits be crits.